when it comes to reporting, I always try to stress, such as when I'm lecturing students, that words have an impact. Words have an impact on sometimes a dramatic scale, but a very small scale as well. So to illustrate this, there was a particular English teacher that I will frankly never forget her for this quite sort of backhanded compliment, I guess. I had gone to the school library and I was after a copy of The Book Thief. The Book Thief was a film that had just come out at that time. I'd seen it for my birthday and I wanted to read the book. It's quite a chunky book. I think it's something like 500, 600 pages long. It's been a while since I've read it. But I will never forget. So I'd gone to check the book out in the school's library, and she said this thing where she said, "Oh, are you?" It was something like, "Are you sure that this is for you? This is quite a heavy-going, complex book." She wouldn't, arguably, I don't think she would have said that to anyone else off the basis of my neurology. It was really quite patronizing, really quite condescending. That's the sort of thing. At the time I was reading sort of 600 pages like a week type thing, because I was a very lonely teenager. I would spend most of my break time, lunchtime in the school library among books. That's where I found sort of crime journalists and all that sort of thing. That's how I knew what I wanted to do. It was a very heavy influence. But it was one of those things that influenced me for a long time, in the sense of sort of, it was just a tiny sort of off the cuff remark, but it was so utterly, it was indicative of an attitude already there, in the sense of sort of, people so often see the term disabled and they think, oh, but, they're not going to achieve anything, let's write them off. That's just on a small scale. When it comes to reporting, it's the way in which we tell stories that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, I think as you were saying, these like small moments, these small words can have massive impact and can, really stick in the mind of neurodivergent person. And like with autistic people, can memorize this information and it can have a lasting effect. And as I said, it's like a microaggression, but it does can mean something quite big.
It is. Things like that are microaggressions, I would argue. I will never forget the teacher who said, when I was at college, for example, there was I'm not a fan of the term in this context. There was a piece that we were looking at again as part of the English class where it described someone as being Aspergerish. So Asperger syndrome as a diagnosis is still used in some territories, but there's also the stereotype that comes with that term, in the sense of being cold and unfeeling. Now, Asperger syndrome is technically my diagnosis, but I was diagnosed down at the time when it was just going out of the diagnostic manual. But the teacher turned around and said, "Oh, have you ever met someone with Asperger syndrome? They're a bit cold and a bit weird."
Oof.
So yeah, I wrote a complaint letter and I took that to the college afterwards, just because it's so sort of, that's so indicative of attitudes, and it's quite outdated as well.
Yeah.
In terms of, it's just sort of stereotypes like that are not acceptable. Don't get me wrong, newspapers are generally chronically underfunded. There's not a lot of funding, but we can still be doing better than that. I really detest it when there are journalists that I talk to sometimes and they say things like, "Oh, but we're so afraid of getting it wrong. I don't know what to say about such and such an issue lest I be attacked for it." Well, isn't the whole point of this profession to ask questions so that you can learn how to do better? So it's things like, in terms of how people may use language, I might describe myself differently to how you might describe yourself. So therefore, surely you should be asking what the individual prefers as a general overall term.
Yeah, and like as I say, it's important to listen to the community, not single voice. And as you were saying about when you was in college, it's like there's an issue with talking about autism and disability as if like there's not someone in the room with a disability or who's autistic, and so that's a big impact and something telling within society that we should be talking about disability and autism, like there could be somebody in that room with it, because you can't see disability, you can't see autism, and you can't always see a disability. But as you're saying, and then that has an impact, and as you're saying, the ableist stereotypes, like it's wrongful to use, and I was diagnosed with the same language, and I would have felt, like quite mostly taken back by that in the same way as you did.
It's I don't quite know what to say here. On occasion I have been taken aback. If you're a teenager, if you're a child, you should not have to be having to deal with this. It should be incumbent on the adults to have a safe space in education. But I think it would be naive to say that that is the case. It's very often not. If there is any sort of behaviour like that now, as I've grown older, I have far less tolerance, to be totally honest. So as an example, there is a former editor. I didn't work with this particular individual for that very long. They were awful, and it was one of the worst experiences I've ever had, frankly. I don't communicate with this person. So on all kind of social media platforms, I have this person blocked. I have people that work for this person also blocked, so he can't contact me. I don't have his phone number, and that's that. It just sort of sometimes in terms of I keep coming back to this idea of space. This is my space, and frankly, ableist influences are not allowed in my space for my peace of mind. I want a peaceful life.
Yeah, can tell that, by, I guess, by your chosen freelance journalism to be able to kind of choose your own autonomy and control, like how you, in the spaces you work, and make sure that when you work, you're working with like an environment where you feel safe and comfortable to be able to not be kind of discriminated against, and be experience
Yeah.
any ableism towards yourself.
Well, it's that thing of if you are in any sort of creative space, you need the space to create. I cannot be effective and I cannot be productive in a space that does not welcome me. I'd argue that's the same for all disabled individuals, whatever their access requirements are.
Yeah, anyway, it tends to be like a lot of autistic and neurodivergent and people to end up in a creative spaces as to have like the skills and talents that needs to be in that space. And as I say, that in the future, at least want to see more done to be able to listen to those voices. And as you were saying, that sometimes, like people are so worried about getting it wrong. And, like if we had more disabled journalists, editors, and more diversity in the newsrooms, then we could see more representation that listens to disabled voices and that doesn't manage to get it wrong and gets it right all the first time.
Exactly. I must confess, having how am I going to put this? So I'm having my book launch not long after I'm talking to you. But it's one of those things where there's a friend of mine, and she, in the nicest way possible, she doesn't always get disability right. And it's sort of in the sense of sort of she has this idea that disabled individuals seem to be like some other completely different animal and like they are not human beings and all that sort of thing. So I've had and it's partly because she doesn't come across disabled individuals that very often. She's come across me, but I have what I refer to as disability privilege. Because of the fact that I can talk semi-fluently, sometimes I have to script and I plan a lot. I come across as quote unquote normal, although people seem to be, when they find out, sometimes people get scared of me. It's sort of like, oh, autism, big scary thing. Okay. But it's one of those things where I sometimes think that it comes from quite ignorant attitudes. How can a place be inclusive if they've not come across a disabled person? It's not right by any means, and it's a sort of self-fulfilling cycle.
Yeah, I was saying for your friend, it's important that, like, if you're in the field of journalism and want to end up talking about, disabled people, it's important to be able to listen to disabled people and actually make that research or understanding of how to ethically represent disabled people. That looks at, how to make sure that they feel included and not seen like another person and to everything.
Yeah. I think it's also culturally, we don't have a culture in the UK and arguably the Western world that listens particularly well. We're quite fast paced due to technology. In terms of listening, I just want to clarify. So I have been working with my friend to sort of familiarize her in what's acceptable and what's not. But it's also, I think it also kind of works both ways. So when writing the book, I had a bit of a rude awakening where, so if I was about to interview someone, I would always ask what their access needs were. So if they needed, they could write answers. It could be a Zoom call, it could be a phone call, it could be anything. That's just sort of, I thought that was quite basic, to be honest. And there was a lovely woman who wrote back to me and she said, but you've made me cry by asking this. Nobody's ever asked me that before, which was sort of quite shocking. Like, it's very basic. It's just sort of, I'm trying to listen. But I think it also works sort of interpersonally as well. So while writing, there were particular points where privately I was sort of being attacked over this. So individuals who I won't name, they would say that they wanted to be interviewed for the book, and then they would just end up being quite rude on a Zoom call. They didn't want to be interviewed, they just wanted to be rude. I've had people sending me quite crappy email messages, where they've not even read the book and they've just said, oh, like blah blah blah, and all that sort of thing. In terms of listening, it's a two-way thing. I'm not saying I'm perfect, nobody is, but we can always be learning.
Yeah, I could agree totally, as said, two-way thing, and that, like, yeah, exactly that. Yeah, I don't know it's any more that I could add onto it. But like going back to some of the stuff he had done in the book, and like some of the food issues, with autistic people I've written down past about. What's the relationship you've been able to understand about if like people who are autistic have like food challenges, and like how does your book represent any like autistic people's negative experiences with food?
There was a myriad of experiences, to be honest. There was a lot, which didn't surprise me.
Yeah.
It's so from the. Do you need to go? I'll be quick.
Oh no, I'm okay.
From the get-go, it was important because research has started to indicate in terms of autism and eating disorders. it was important that there was resources at the back of the book for this reason. When it came to interviewing individuals, I would ask about their experiences. If they wanted to talk about that, that was fine. If they didn't, okay. There was very often quite a universal shape to it almost. So a lot of individuals, they would talk about how they had been bullied in education, particularly when it came to learning how to cook. They had been discriminated against by their teachers. Other experiences very often were parents didn't understand, and the word fussy would come up a lot. Fussy to, therefore we must force this food on this child to eat it. And then we wondered why children grow up to be adults with quite complicated relationships with food. There were individuals who had eating disorders or who were receiving treatment at the time. They are interviewed in the book. If that was particularly important. I'm just trying to think. No one's ever asked me this question before. It was important to have a range of different experiences. So we have sensory processing disorder. We have different things. When it comes to, there were individuals who had a cross section of needs. So we often had things such as ADHD and that kind of thing. So to run in tandem with the book, I was actually running a podcast to kind of curate the separate conversations. Only because this is the Autism Friendly Cookbook, I can't put every single conversation and every experience that has an intersection in there.
Yeah, I can imagine. I thought, it would be a good question to ask you, because just to get a sense of what type of issues you talked about in the book and addressed and discussed within the interviews. As I thought I asked you about some of the wider big experiences autistic people face around food, and it seems like your book does give a wide variety and a good image of what the autistic experience and relationship with food is.
Don't get me wrong, I wish that it had been more diverse, but there had been events that played out at the end of last year. I wish I had done better on diversity grounds. But in terms of editing, and I was frankly not really well. I was not in a good place at the time of writing. I wish I had done better in that sense.
I suppose, it's one of those things when you're writing a book and, trying to predict it. I guess you end up being more of the toughest critique of it. And then I guess, you probably notice things like, oh, you should have you wanted to do this and that. And I guess it's then quite hard to fit it all into a book, and then, fit all the ideas you want to say in the book. And I guess of course, there'd be some areas that you wouldn't be able to, add in or represent that you would have wished to.
Which is why I have pitched a follow-up to the publisher, just because there was just so much material that I did not get to use, and I think it should have a place. I don't know if they'll pick it up. I hope they do. There could be a second part 2 to this. I have no idea.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, it seems like a great idea. Seems like you no. Since you finished the book, I guess you're fitting with ideas to go with it.
Why, thank you. It's if they do, I should know next month. I hope they do. I'd quite like to write another book. It's sort of weirdly addictive, although that they are terrible for making money out of. It's just sort of one of those things among sort of the freelance assignments and interviews and things are sort of like, oh, look, here's a book I just happened to write. Everyone needs a pandemic project.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone needs that project on release. And I guess because something else being autistic and discussing the autistic experience of food, I guess then it might become your own a focused interest within yourself, starting this book and something you enjoyed researching and producing.
There was a lot of enjoyment. it's also, if you write about food, it's a good excuse to go and eat food. I find just it was also quite strange. So in the book, there's a chef that, not a chef, sorry. There's an individual who owns a business called Community Chef, which is based quite near to where I live. It's been really quite strange in the nicest way possible to, it's sort of, in terms of connection, writing this has brought back people that I haven't spoken to for many, many years. Robin, who owns Community Chef, actually taught me when I was at secondary school nearly a decade ago. And it was so weird. So in lockdown, we had a cooking class on Zoom with the charity that used to support me. I didn't remember his organization, but I remembered him. So it was really quite weird. Suddenly this person pops up on my Zoom screen and go, I know you. Where do I know you from? So he was a wonderful interviewee for the book. He taught me a lot. I attended his classes. One of the most wonderful things happened in January. So the first teacher who kind of taught me to love language and history and all that sort of thing, she taught me how to write. She hasn't taught me for nearly 20 odd years, right? She found me because she'd seen about the book in a magazine. It was just the most most wonderful thing. But she contacted me via Facebook. I don't quite know how, because my account is on the highest privacy settings that you can do so. But she found me just to say that she was so pleased. It was just so absolutely wonderful.
Oh, well, I guess I must have felt amazing to, like, be able to have this book turn into a way of finding old connections and, like, guess, finding bits from your past life coming back.
It was slightly spooky, I will admit that, but it was just so absolutely wonderful in the sense of sort of I was a very quiet, very sort of loner type student all the time. I don't think any of my teachers would have thought, oh, she'd go and write a book and she'll actually turn out to be a writer. There wasn't particularly that many expectations. There wasn't exactly high hopes from a lot of people who taught me, but it was just so wonderful, and I'm very excited to actually meet her after all this time. The last time I saw her was about 10 years ago. She taught me nearly 20.
I guess you must have been proud to seeing you be like opening up a magazine and seeing your book advertising for, seeing the students you taught, publish their own book.
I will have to ask her. It is the sort of I know that she will remember me basically as a teeny tiny child who had quite a lot of massive curves, to be honest. It's all up today, but just the sort of, yeah, it's been really quite weird, and sort of now it's at the point of looking to the future and thinking, okay, what next? Who knows?
Yeah. Oh, well, it seems like you got a lot of things, like ideas for what could come next. And so one thing I tend to ask, on a podcast is what things could be able to be done to change for the better for yourself on neurodivergent people.
That is a big question. I don't have all the answers. One of the things that needs to change, particularly in the UK, is in terms of the ingrained societal attitudes. I'm going to start that sentence again. Sorry.
Sorry.
I recently read Crippled, which is a brilliant book by the Guardian columnist Frances Bryan. She talks about how there's this catch-22 attitude where, typically speaking, disabled individuals, autistic people count legally as being disabled. They are counted as, in terms of statistics and reporting. We have this quite scaremonger type attitude. We all hear the stereotypes about the benefits scrounger, for example. And yet, with that comes the benefits scrounger needs their benefits taken off them in order to get into work. How can you, first of all, that's not right at all. But secondly, the workplace is so often inaccessible. So how on earth can you put people into employment? It's just the catch-22 ridiculousness of that attitude is that needs to be undone. We need conversations around benefits and supporting without the, frankly, idiocy of the government currently. For example, why is it that previously individuals who have no understanding whatsoever of what the service is, why are they in charge of it if they don't understand? PIP, which is personal independence payment, is not means tested. It shouldn't be. It should remain not means tested. And yet, so very often, government ministers have said, oh, it's to do with work. No, it's not. It's to do with the cost of disability, which are substantial. Living in the UK, for example, just each month. Look at what Scope says. And finally, in terms of healthcare, we need to actually start having a conversation. If you look at the terrible stories such as that of Connor Sparrowhawk, his mum wrote a brilliant book called Justice for Laughing Boy. That is a damning indictment of what is wrong. Autism, so very often it crosses over with things such as learning disabilities. If you look at the lifespan for this particular group of individuals, that's shocking. It shouldn't be that way in 2022. There needs to be actually something done about this, and not just the ridiculous kind of like empty promises of going, oh, we'll write a paper, we'll write a white paper, but we'll do nothing about it. We'll do nothing about this when it comes to the prison service. We'll do nothing about it when it comes to the NHS. We'll just forget about it because it's not important. It should be.
Yeah, I was saying there's some alarming stuff of the cost of living prices and now the cost of disability, kind of collides with that. So yeah, it's kind of like a growing issue that does need to be addressed, because it's all getting to the breaking point now. Well, people are at the point of it, where it's a massive problem and it's growing when, and I want to ask, is there anything else you wanted to say in the interview? Because it seems like we covered a lot of ground for what I listed for the questions.
I think that's everything. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Do you mind me asking when this will be out?
I think I'll be trying to put it out within a week because try to get it out soon because I think your publish releases soon anyway.
The book is out on next Monday. I just wanted to check because I'll tell the publisher to share it.
Yeah, I'll try to get it out by this Sunday because I want to get the episodes out each Sunday.
That's amazing. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Right, do you want to promote any social media accounts you got? Like say anywhere for you to follow?
Oh, you can find me anywhere on Instagram and Twitter, for example. My handle is journo_Lydia. I'm also writing over on Substack, which is lydiawilkins.substack.com. Otherwise, you can just Google me. The book is out everywhere. It's available on places such as Amazon for worldwide deliveries. You can get it via Barnes & Noble if you're in the States, Waterstones, WH Smith, bookshop.org. It's available now.
Thank you, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank